winter is not really the best time to start learning how to identify trees. But what I want to teach you this afternoon is not so much, you know, this is an oak, this is an ash and so forth, but how you go about recognising different trees. You know, sort of the method you use to get to know them and get to know the different characteristics. And before we set out, I just want to show you some books, because one of the best ways of learning to identify trees is to get hold of a decent book that gives you some good illustrations of the different trees that you might find. So if you'd like to come a little closer, start with this one. It's very small. That's always an advantage, smallness. It means you can pop it in your pocket and go out in the woods or the fields or whatever. The disadvantage of that is there's not very much space per tree. So there's not a lot of space for a great deal of description or very many illustrations. Another thing is that this book attempts to illustrate, in my opinion, too many trees, and this is a fault with a lot of tree identification books. They include a whole lot of species that you will normally only find in a park or an arboretum, and actually finding one and identifying it is a bit pointless. Okay, so someone's planted an ornamental tree, big deal. It's much better just to look at it and enjoy the visual aspect of it without necessarily knowing what it is. Whereas the trees that are useful, like all the native trees, because native trees are ones that are growing wild at any rate, they can tell you something about the soil and about the microclimate and so forth. And then there are the fruit trees and perhaps, you know, forestry trees, quite important, I must say. Even after all these years I'm terrible at conifers. But the trees that are you're likely to find playing a significant or useful role in the landscape. And shrubs. A good guide should also include shrubs, because, you know, they're just as important as trees, and the distinction between a tree and a shrub is fairly academic. So this one is small, which is a plus, tries to deal with too many trees, which is a minus, but it also has a good feature, and that is it has two keys. Now the key of one of these books is usually found in the front, and it's a series of multiple answer questions which help you to identify the tree. So it starts off, does the tree have broad leaves or needles? You know, one route takes you off down to the conifers and the other down to the broadleaf trees. And it goes on and on and on until finally you get one question that will actually tell you this is the field maple, Acer campestris or something like that. And so the thing about this book is it's got one based on leaf shape, and it's got another one for winter use based on twigs and buds, and that is really useful because, you know, for half the year that's what you've got for identification. At the other extreme we have this one, which is really, you know, it's like a bit too big to put in your pocket and go out to the woods, but it was a lovely book. I mean, again, it does try to cover, in my opinion, much too wide a range of trees. But for real, you know, tree lovers, I mean, the people who wrote this book, you can tell that they have an absolute passion for trees, both the writer and the illustrator. And that really comes across in what they do. And a lot of detail. It doesn't really have a key, but actually it's not too difficult to find things. At the front they have sort of a page of leaf shapes and a page, or several pages of leaf shapes and pages of twig shapes and things like that. Lovely book, but perhaps not the most practical thing to take out in the woods. Another one which is quite big is this one, which is basically a wildflower book, but it also includes grasses, ferns, trees and shrubs. So although it's quite a meaty book, it does include all the plants that you're likely to find. I mean, you can get some which include all the plants and the animals that you're likely to find out in the countryside, but those ones, well, they can be quite useful. It does mean that you just take out one book with you, but if you're interested in plants, this is quite a good one. Again, it suffers from this thing that because it deals with so many plants, the amount of space allotted to each tree species is very small. You know, there's sort of half a dozen or more tree species just on those two pages. So if you're not really already fairly familiar with trees, you might find there's not enough there. But if you are, you know, it might be enough to tell you the difference between, oh yes, that really is that is such and such. It's not something else, you know, where you'd already had an idea of the possibilities. Altogether, actually, this is a book for people who already know something about plants. And finally, there's this one, Trees and Bushes, by two Danish people whose names I forget, Helga Vedel and Johan Lange. And this is my favourite. I borrowed it off my mum about 30 years ago, and I still haven't given it back. Well, she probably doesn't need it anymore, you know, she's 94 or something. So anyway, never mind about my mum. It's got a really good key at the front with, you know, very clear leaf shapes, but it hasn't got the winter key. So, you know, every book has pluses and minuses. And so, you know, if you're looking out for a book, these are the things to look out for, you know. Good key, not too many species, enough space for each one, good illustrations. Now this book has got good illustrations, because what you want from an illustration is detail. There's no point having a series of lollipops, you know, one lollipop, oak, another lollipop, beech. You know, those kinds of pictures are pretty useless. What you want is something that will actually, you can actually look at it and say, oh yeah, it's like that, you know, like here. So it's two different kinds of larch, European larch and Japanese larch, and you can actually see the difference in the shape of the fruits and the needles and so forth, and you can tell which one it is. So it's got a reasonable number of species included, not too many. It includes shrubs. It's got information at the back, which is easily cross-referenced with the illustrations towards the front. I don't think it's still in print, but you can get it off the internet second-hand. Excellent book. So if you really want to get to learn trees, I recommend that you find a nice book. And the ideal thing is go to a shop where they sell lots of different ones and leaf through them and think, yeah, I could use this, or no, I couldn't. Or even better, if you know somebody who's got one, actually borrow it from them and take it out and see if you can come to a secured definition of a particular tree using it. Right. Now, what have we here? Various different things to look for. I mean, the first thing is just the general character of the tree. When you're learning to identify trees, you start off by looking for very specific features, like the shape of the leaf. There's no phrases for telling me what kind of tree I'm standing underneath. The shape of the leaf, or the shape of the buds, or the bark, the branches. Okay, so this is an oak. Fairly obvious. And one of the things about oak is that the branches are not very straight. If you look up, you see, as Sarah, who's coming next week, she often says they're all knees and elbows, which is rather good. It's to do with the growth pattern of oak, because the leading bud is very rarely the one that actually grows in the spring. It's often one of the ones at the side. So the branch goes along, and then it takes a little corner, and then it takes another little corner, and that's how you get that pattern of branches. And this is a magnificent tree, really, isn't it? I wouldn't be any good for a timber merchant, because, well, there's not much trunk, is there? That's because it's grown in a hedge rather than in a wood surrounded by the trees. Well, we went through all this in the ecology module, didn't we? But in terms of just a tree as an individual, it's quite magnificent. So, you know, I picked up a leaf and I said, oh, well, here's an oak leaf, so it must be an oak. But don't be too sure about that, because leaves get blown all over the place, and some leaves last longer than others. Oak leaves are one of the ones that actually are slow to rot down. Ash leaves disappear in a twinkle. So you could be standing under a tree which has got oak leaves on the ground, and it might be an ash, because those ash leaves rotted down months ago, and there's been a lot of wind, and oak leaves have been blown underneath the tree. So that's just something to be aware of. The ones that really last a long time are oak, sweet chestnut, native maple. What else, Mike? Beech, of course. Beech lasts longer than anything. Yeah. And the others, well, you know, they vary, but the others generally rot down more quickly.